Nicest celebrity you've ever met? Keanu Reeves was at coffee shop and no place to sit. A man said, "Please join me here." I sat and realized it was him and talked about comic books for about 30 minutes. Normal as can be. When I was a kid, like 2 or 3, I often saw an old man at a grocery store with a small, white dog. The man came up to me one day and handed me a basket. He said I could walk the dog while filling up the basket with candy, which he then later paid for. This became the routine whenever I saw that man at the grocery store. Walk dog, get candy. That man was Gene Wilder. I got candy from Willy Wonka himself. I love Gene Wilder, absolutely one of my favorite actors, and I wish he was still acting. It's so sad about Gilda. A few years back, my grandmother, then about 75 years old, and Adam Sandler's father had back-to-back chemo appointments in Boston. Every week she would see Adam Sandler, in sunglasses, come with his father to chemo. Her cancer was stage 3 at this point and she was under a great deal of stress, and honest to God, Adam Sandler used to rub her back and ease her nerves before going in. Unfortunately his dad died that year, but my grandmother made a full recovery. Never really liked Adam Sandler's stuff that much, but the way he treated my sick, elderly grandmother was incredible. I hope this doesn't get buried. I tell this story all the time and nobody believes me, but it really happened. What a great guy. Dave Chappelle has a history of running very long comedy shows. My buddy and I saw one of his shows a while back. It ran very late, until almost 4 AM, on a weekday. By the end, almost the entire crowd had trickled out to get up early for work the next day and whatnot. Only about a dozen of us remained at the show by this point. Dave invited us to all play basketball with him the next afternoon. He had rented out an entire gym for an hour. Of course my buddy and I took him up on the offer. We played pick-up hoops with Dave Chappelle for over an hour. After everyone finished playing, a handful of us stuck around and shot the crap with Dave. He bought us all fruit smoothies and gave us free tickets to his show the next night. Super nice guy, just like he is on TV. Couldn't have been any cooler. I remember reading a story about him from someone who lived in the same town as he did in Ohio. The author was a bank teller at a small bank and in walks Dave Chappelle with his son. They withdrew $5,000 and asked for it in one of those unmarked money bags. They then proceeded to full-on sprint out of the bank and back to his car. Seems like a fun dude. Michael Caine. My family and I were having lunch at a restaurant and he was sitting at the table next to us. My sister's boyfriend cracks out a line that his character says in Children of Men. Okay, the Human Project gives this great, big dinner for all the scientists and sages in the world. They are tossing around theories about the ultimate mystery. Why are all the women infertile? Why can't we make babies anymore? So, some say it's genetic experiments, gamma rays, pollution, same ol'. So, anyway, in the corner, this Englishman's sitting. He hasn't said a word. He is just tucking in his dinner. So, they decide to ask him. They say, "Well, why do you think we can't make babies anymore?" And he looks up at him. He's chewing on this great big wing and he says, "I haven't the faintest idea." He said, "But this stalk is quite tasty, isn't he?" He chuckles and acknowledges our presence. When he stands up to leave, my mother tells him that she just has to tell him that he is her favorite actor, that anything he makes, she loves. He walks up to her, kisses her on the head, and tells her she made his day. I'm glad Michael Caine is as classy as he seems. Tom Hanks doesn't just seem like the nicest guy. I was a nanny for a Hollywood family, met hundreds of A-listers. Most of them were self-obsessed wankers. But Tom took the time to shake my hand and made sure he learned my name. He never forgot it. Also, he would always say, "There's a snake in my boot" for the youngest of my charges, which obviously made him laugh hysterically. I would love to see an AMA, if you could. I'm a nanny, so I'd understand some of what you did, but not to the extent of nannying for Hollywood children. I'd be interested in reading about your experiences, if it's legal. P. Believe it or not, Marilyn Manson. This was 2000. My brother had cancer and got the chance to meet him. He brought my brother all sorts of memorabilia and sat and chatted to him for a few hours, playing TV games with him, playing guitar, even reading Beano comics, all in the comfort of my own home. My brother passed away 3 weeks later and was in his MMT shirt when he passed. I believe this. He is supposed to be incredibly nice. Working in a magic shop in my 20s, Muhammad Ali came in. My boss, huge Ali fan from back in the day, was visibly staggered. I guess Ali was his idol when he was younger. Ali hung around for a couple hours. We did some tricks for him. He did some for us. Pretty good, too, considering his hands trembled and he didn't talk. He was totally beyond cool with us taking some pictures. He posed my boss punching him in the shin and wrote a thank you postcard to us a week or so later. He signed it Cassius Clay. Oops, I mean Muhammad Ali. Cool Ali story from the 1980s. My dad has been a huge Ali fan since his early days. One time in the 1984 or 85, Dad was on a plane flight with my older sister, who was a newborn. He hears someone say you have a beautiful baby girl from the aisle. Lo and behold, it's Muhammad Ali. Apparently Ali asked to hold her and kissed her forehead. I went on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disney with Tony Hawk. He had given me his autograph earlier at a convention and we just happened to be in line together. He was really cool. I always forget that Tony Hawk is a real person and not just a character made up for those video games. Victor Wooten. He was signing a Flecktones CD for me after a show and I shook his hand and said, I hope 1% of your talent rubs off on me. He said, hey, I want some of what you have. Just happy to see Victor Wooten mentioned. A semi-god for some. Standing in the shadow for many. Adam Savage of the Mythbusters. Very nice and personable, and that childlike excitement he has on the show is definitely not an act. Alison Brie. Ran into her and a few friends at a really tiny winery in Sonoma. Super cool. Took some pictures with us and had us take some goofy pictures with her and her friends. She was awesome and kept saying how nice we were for telling her we loved her. Go Trudy. Clint Eastwood. Had dinner with him while he was directing Mystic River. Great guy. Some of the others in the cast of that movie, not so much. I'll elaborate if anyone wants to hear about it. Woohoo. Story time. I waited on John Malkovich a couple of years ago. Fairly low-key and unassuming. He seemed just as strange as you would expect him to be. We had butcher paper and crayons on the tables at this place. Kind of an art-themed joint, and he drew picture of a little house. Still have the drawing to this day. George Takei. He stopped a press conference I was observing to meet a little boy and sign his doll because he was sick and going home. And the meet and greet wasn't scheduled until later. The reporters looked a little put off, but George gave that little kid 100% of his attention for 2 minutes or so. I could see the kid's day was made. George Takei is amazing. One of the few celebrities I follow on Facebook, Twitter. Robert Downey Jr. Met him a long time ago when he was filming US Marshals. He is just a really nice guy. On a side note, went out of my way to search for Tommy Lee Jones at the same time. Finally caught up to him, and he was a complete prick. Ewan McGregor. Literally the nicest guy ever in existence. Also, he can put the booze away. Drunk a 6'2" security guard mate of mine under the table. I was an extra on Harold and Kumar 3 and I got to meet some of the cast. I ended up talking to Kal Penn Kumar for a while. Later he added me on Facebook and gave me his email. Turns out we were interested in the same academia. We've kept in touch since and he told me he owes me a beer next time he's in the area. Coolest guy I've met and thankful to call him a friend. Saw him in an airport bathroom once. We just looked at each other strangely. My girlfriend's mom lives in a house on a private island off of Miami Beach. The girlfriend and I are down there on vacation last summer and I am fixing the taillight on her mom's car when I see Lenny Kravitz walking up with his little dog. He says something along the lines of, I have never seen you around before. I said I was visiting with my girlfriend. I will never forget this tall chick. Then he got this big smile on his face and said, right on. He high-fives me and walked away. At that moment I knew what cool was and I knew I would never have it. I hate to break this to you, but Kenny Kravitz slept with your girlfriend. Bruce Campbell. I waited on him 3 times at a restaurant in Ashland, Oregon. The first time I was nervous as crap, so I was very awkward with him. The second time, my co-worker and I started drinking Irish coffees on the job and I began talking to him immediately. Convo as follows. Me taking order. Take wife's order first. Turn to Bruce. And for you, Bruce. This visibly surprised him. Stutters his order. His wife chimes in. Now how did you know he was Bruce? Me. I'm kind of a big fan. Bruce takes off his glasses. Puts out his hand. What's your name? Son. I'm Bruce and this is Ida. Sweet as apple cider. Me. Alreda. We continue talking about film school and such. The third time I waited on him he remembered my name and it was awesome. Hail the king. Ashland. Nicest, Marie Osmond. My ex-girlfriend used to babysit her kid. I met her on some riverboat party that she was hosting for something. She was lovely. Coolest. Dave Grohl. Had some beers with him in Las Vegas. I asked him if I was playing in town. And he said number. Just hanging out. So we drank beer and talked about stuff. Worst, Dr. Phil. He was berating some waitstaff in the high roller room. In her face. Screaming. Red-faced. He saw me giving the disapproving stare and screamed, "What are you looking at?" I said, "A piece of crap." Then walked away. Upvote for calling Dr. Phil a piece of crap. Rowan Atkinson and his family were in the same heli ski group as me and my family in Chamonix, France. It was a private group company, but the guide we hired had a pretty bad injury, so they had to join groups. My family was really excited, as we all really love Blackadder, Thin Blue Line, Mr. Bean, etc. When he, his wife, his daughter and my family first met up, we introduced ourselves as huge fans of his, and if he would mind if we got his autograph. He said he'd do us one better, and take us out to dinner after we finished skiing. That was the funniest dinner I've ever had. TLDR. Went skiing with Mr. Bean in France and he took my family out to dinner afterwards. Tom Hanks and The Rock. I used to live on Edwards AFB in the Mojave Desert of California. During this time, I was witness to several movie and television productions. Tom Hanks was shooting scenes for From the Earth to the Moon, which he was a producer for. The filming for that was happening adjacent to where my mother was working. My brother and I were there. Parents couldn't afford a sitter, so her break room and the TV was our sitter. Mr. Hanks came into the building, I guess to use the restroom. My brother and I got to meet him. Very nice, very polite, was very fascinated in the history of the base. Next, a few short years later, I met The Rock. He had filmed some scenes for the Scorpion King on the fringes of the base where it was a bit rockier and more desolate. As a thank you for using the base and many airmen as extras, the production company showed the movie 2 weeks before it hit theaters. After the film there was a Q&A and autographs. I was wearing my football jersey. My brother and I had come from practice immediately to the movie theater. Having played football, The Rock asked my brother and I about our team, our record, etc. While we had a brief conversation he generally appeared interested in our small little team. So yay, Tom Hanks and Dwayne The Rock Johnson were very nice. Right before Saving Private Ryan came out, Tom Hanks apparently called a bunch of World War II veterans to thank them and talk about their time in service. He ended up talking to my grandpa for a good hour about all sorts of random things and I heard he was an overall great guy. I met Dom DeLuise a bunch of times when I was a kid. I guess he owned a house nearby, and he shopped at the same grocery store as my family. Every time I saw him he'd do little magic tricks and give me a $2 bill. Once he let me help him put his groceries in his car, and I almost crushed his tomatoes. He shouted, "Kyle, watch the tomatoes," and laughed. Guy liked his tomatoes. He was just a ridiculously sweet guy. This makes me feel warm inside. Dom DeLuise is magnificent. I always wanted to meet him. Hayden Panettiere, who is the only celebrity I ever met, which was at Philadelphia Comic Con. She was super nice and took the time to talk to me and answer some of my questions and make small talk with me. Her publicist or whoever it was at the booth with her was trying to rush me along, as was the Comic Con staff volunteers, but Hayden was like, "No, I want to talk to him, let him say what he wants to say." It really meant a lot to me. Probably too late to jump in this conversation, but I filmed a documentary on clean water and sanitation in rural villages in India. Matt Damon contacted my group, about 5 students on a low budget, and said he heard about what we were doing and that he'd be in India. Ended up spending some time with him and his brother, and Gary White, and traveling from village to village. People didn't know who the famous person was. They knew one of us was famous though, and would come up and greet all of us with equal excitement. The whole time Matt just chatted us up about what we wanted to do with our lives, basketball, issues related to our film, etc. Seriously a great dude. I have loads of respect for him. He also gave us a killer interview, and in one of the villages, the kids had prepared a song for him. He responded later in the day by singing a song for them. I love Matt Damon, but every time I read his name I can't help but to say it in my head the way his puppet did in Team America. I've heard tons of good things about Damon. I actually liked his GQ interview about the newborn. Luke Wilson. He golfed at the private course I work at. Could not have been nicer. Chatted with me for at least half an hour and answered all the crazy questions I had about old school, that 70s show, and idiocracy. After all this he asked me where the men's locker room was, so I obliged and he slapped me a $50. I work at a non-tipping course so he knew he didn't have to. As he left he said, "It was nice meeting you, 500 channels," to which I replied, "The pleasure was all mine, Godfather." Morgan Freeman flies into my work semi-regularly. We handle the fueling for his jet. He is one of the nicest people I've ever met. And yes, his voice actually does make you tired. Nolan Ryan was a complete dong. He too flies in every once in a while. I love the Rangers, but I can't stand him. Reba McEntire is one heck of a sweet lady. Still pretty attractive for her age too. Bill Clinton brought me and my co-workers steak fajitas from El Paso when he flew in. He's incredibly nice and had a real conversation with me about my job and school and such. He actually listened and asked questions. Not normal for someone famous. Best fajitas ever. And NASCAR teams fly in all the time. We actually have some flying in tomorrow night for fuel. Always a heck of a time when they're here. Most of the time they're nice, but there's always a couple buttholes. George R. Martin. I was walking around at a convention a couple years ago and saw him just ambling around. Being the ridiculous fan of both ASOIF and wild cards that I am, I of course approached him and started talking to him. We ended up standing there for 10 minutes or so, just standing in the aisle between 2 booths chatting about his various projects. He has to get that kind of thing all the time, especially now that the TV show is so popular. But he was extremely friendly and seemed completely unhurried to end the conversation. You are the reason he isn't finishing the books, you jerk. I met Sam Rockwell the other day. He was totally cool about it and asked me my name when he had every right to tell me to pee off, given that I'd pushed the door open to meet him. What a neat dude. And the best and most underrated actor of his generation, on top of that. Dong Van Dyke. I met him while doing a performance for Disney's Candlelight at Disneyland one year. He was super nice and talked to everyone who asked him questions. He told us all about his past career and how much he enjoyed talking to people who enjoyed his films. He was super polite, told great jokes, and he listened to all the things people had to say about him. Not like Mickey Rooney the year before. That guy was a prick. Just a few that come to mind. Danny DeVito. He bought personalized gifts, that is, a nice juggling set for a person who he only talked to once that happened to mention he was an amateur juggler. For all the production assistants on set, Al Pacino. Had dinner with him and he was intense about his latest project but also super nice and genuine. Alan Cumming. Had dinner with him and he was hilarious, down to earth and a blast. John Lithgow. Coached my girlfriend's basketball team. Awesome dad in person. Great coach. Not so nice. Mariah Carey. Enough said. Paris Hilton. My car broke down on an autobahn in Germany. Managed to coast a sort of lay-by thing with a burger van and toilets in it. I was in a bad state because I can't speak any German. My phone had no credit and I didn't have my breakdown details with me, so I had no idea what to do. I unsuccessfully asked the guy in the burger van for help and he apparently didn't speak English, so rather pathetically I started to cry. Then this big old American guy appeared and offered me a cup of tea in his motorhome. It wasn't proper tea, but that's besides the point. In the van was another guy in friggin' Paris Hilton. I kid you not. She was sweet and made me a sandwich and gave me a hug, then proceeded to talk to me for 30 minutes about some old radio bits she'd bought in some show in Friedrichshafen. I didn't understand most of it. She said that when she wasn't working she liked to drive about Europe going to radio and air shows as if she put a hat on, nobody ever recognized her. Then they towed me to a garage at about 40 km per hour. Scary stuff on the autobahn. Oh yeah, and she sat in my car and asked if it was okay before she smoked. TL. DNR Paris Hilton saved me in Germany and towed me to a garage. George Clooney. A while back I was living with my best friend and his dad. His dad worked for a trucking company that was contracted to pull the actor trailers, set pieces, you name it, for the set of The Ides of March. Once in a while they would drive the actors to set if they were told to do so. Every day when he got home I'd ask him if he ran into George, since I knew he was directing acting in the film. Most of the time he didn't see anyone, but he came in from work and told me that he actually got to talk with Mr. Clooney, as he called him. Apparently he was walking around one of the trailers and almost bumped into him. Instead of getting pee, George just kinda laughed and started punching his stomach jokingly, then told him, what if I was carrying coffee, Mike? Now, according to my friend's dad, George had only heard his name once before when George had asked him to do something for him about 3 weeks beforehand. Then they chatted about life and all that for about a half hour. So, not only did George Clooney not get pee when my friend's dad about plowed him over, but he remembered his name after really only hearing it in passing and then just chatted up with him. Morgan Freeman. We're both from the same state, Mississippi. I was having lunch near his hometown when I noticed him. He took the time to talk to me, despite my epic fan grin, and paid for my food before he left. Best lunch I ever had. So in conclusion, I met God. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.